Well, if you're a political junkie, you love this time of year and these dates on the calendar. We are recording this, are in the midst of the week in which the Republican National Convention is being held. And over the weekend, on Saturday evening, I happened to be, for whatever reason, I think I was grading papers, but I had the TV on in the background and got to see the assassination attempt of former President Trump take place live in real time.
Wow.
And it's just been a crazy season. So my name is Dan. I'm one of the teaching pastors at Life Fellowship in suburban Charlotte, North Carolina. My partner in crime, Ben, is out today with a case of walking pneumonia. So it's going to be just me and Josh Brahm, who is our producer and one of the smartest guys I know. I always enjoy talking to him about just about everything. So we're just going to be talking about this. So Josh, do you get into this? Do you watch any of this? Is this something that are you kind of the guy that looks at the headlines later on?
So I've typically been the guy that watches this. Like when the 2016 election was going on, like I live tweeted like almost all the debates. I was really involved. And then Trump happened, and I slowly became less and less focused on that. And so lately, in the last few years, I've been kind of not paying too much attention to all the stories, but I've got to pay enough attention for my job because I run a nonprofit, and abortion kind of is involved in the election a lot. And so I've got thoughts. It's been crazy. I was at a Texas homeschool conference when the assassination attempt happened.
Oh, were you really?
Talking
Even
to
on
a
a Saturday night.
very conservative person.
Yeah.
So we were thankful that I think no one at the conference figured out what happened until like after we left. But that would have been a pretty chaotic scene.
Yeah, and certainly our thoughts are with the family who lost their father and husband, and in addition to those two men that are still in very critical condition from the ramifications of that. And you know, I'm old enough to remember the Robert Kennedy assassination, the Martin Luther King assassination. I remember those very well, even though I was a young child. And then there was the midst of the summer of unrest with the Democratic National Convention in Chicago, which became just an amazing spectacle of chaos and overreach in some cases, and so. It feels a lot the same. Not going to lie to you. It feels very, very similar. And that, though, I think there's probably more of a political motivation behind the assassinations of the 60s than they were today. This looks to be at this time, and everything changes from moment to moment. So at the time I'm saying this, it looks to be like some crazy young man who probably was
bullied a lot,
was probably just unstable in general. And I can't help but think maybe ended up doing something that he figured he was going to get stopped doing at some point, unless he was just incredibly arrogant or stupid. The steps he had to take to get into the position and so forth also reveals just a shocking breakdown in security in general. And I know, because I'm on social media, I know there's a ton of conspiracy theories out there. I'm not one that generally jumps onto those bandwagons, but at its very most, at the most polite and generous assessment, the Secret Service screwed up big time.
It's, we don't have to jump to conspiracy theories in order to say, like, and regardless of, you know, there's been all these different theories thrown out, but like I've seen people like the Secret Service was being told to stand down or is choosing like all that stuff. Like, I don't buy that for a second.
Right.
These people, their one and only focus, especially at a live event like that, like that is all you're thinking about. I'm just stunned at the failure of execution. I don't know how that happens.
Yeah, and just to put another layer on the conspiracy theory, our country is deeply divided, and it's basically divided 40-40-20. You know, there's 20 in the middle and 40 that feel strongly. And even in terms of pastors, and so forth, it is 40-40-20. There's just that. So you have to assume that even on the Secret Service, there are people who love Donald Trump, people who hate Donald Trump, and people who are in the middle, kind of like, I just don't like politics. And in the reality, if they had been told to stand down, Do you not think that some of these people would have been howling from the rooftops? Do you not think that some of these people would, they literally would have taken a bullet. We saw what they did as soon as the bullet rang out. Yeah. So it requires us to suspend levels of logic that I'm not comfortable doing in order to just chase some of these conspiracy theories around. But
it goes without saying, but we're both like, you and I have been relatively public in our distaste for at least some of the things that President Trump, former President Trump, has said or done. But we are so happy that he's okay. We're so happy that he's like, this is a horrible, horrible thing. Like, we came within an inch of a horrific act of political violence that would have completely changed history. I am concerned about the state of chaos in our society right now, but it would be so much worse.
Oh, absolutely.
If one is different.
And no matter how strongly you feel either way, and because you and I tend to be just not thrilled with either candidate, but had it been Joe Biden instead of Donald Trump, I would feel exactly the same. Horror, fear, relief that it didn't get worse, absolute heartbroken for innocent victims who were just there because they're Americans and like the process. So, and that kind of takes me into this thing, and then I know we're going to change gears a little bit, because this whole episode is not about assassination. It's just about the political things that we're seeing in the headlines.
The assassination attempt.
Yeah, assassination attempt. Thank you. The reality is this: we as Christians need to. Sometimes it's best to just kind of wait and let the facts emerge.
Yes.
So my social media feeds, and I realize they're controlled by algorithms, and the majority of people on my feeds are going to be probably pro-Trump conservative people. Even though I got a lot of people from both sides that are friends and so forth. And by the way, I know how to be friends with people that don't see things the way I see them.
Good for you.
But in the end, my Facebook wall, my X wall, they're filled with these absurd, not just theories but responses. So. And this is what really concerns me about a lot of Christians in these moments. We tend. Do I believe that God is sovereignly in charge of this world? Yes. Do I believe God protects people from violence? Yes. Do I believe that the heart of the king is in the hands of God? Yes. I believe all of these things. Do I know that God intentionally changed anything about the assassination attempt in order to protect Donald Trump's life? I assume that nothing passes through any of our existences outside of the at least permissive will of God.
Right.
Okay. At the same time, I'm going to guess that the wife and daughters of the guy that did get killed kind of wished that same protection had applied to him as well as Donald Trump.
Right.
And then these folks who are wrapping it around prophetic mystery and so forth. And some of them are just so egregiously, I'm going to go ahead and use the full term in heretical. Using the passages from Leviticus as it deals with the priest and the cutting of the ear and the blood on and so forth, and trying to draw. And there's actually one of the bad things about assassinations is that we tend to turn them into martyrs.
Yes.
And even people who may not be worthy of martyrdom, once they lose their life or their cause, become larger than life, and rallying points. And that would have happened
Trump
here. For
already is. So
he already is. He's larger than life. Yeah. Which, and I think we're seeing that at display at the Republican convention this week as well. And certainly, if I'd dodged a bullet that way, I'd be embracing probably the same type of attitude. It's not a judgment; it's an observation.
Sure.
But we Christians need to cool our jets a little bit when we try to wrap, the one I see, the AI where it's got Jesus standing behind him while he's speaking.
That's gross.
Yeah, and so forth. We need to be really. Donald Trump is not a messiah. He's not even a committed believer.
No.
And so you know what? God protects unbelievers too, so that His will can be done and performed. But sometimes He does that to evil men because part of our judgment is, and I'm not saying Donald Trump is evil, and I'm not saying he's special, and I'm not saying he's a messiah complex. I'm just simply saying we Christians need to be really, really careful about misapplying the Word of God.
Yeah.
Because that's a sacred trust.
Yes.
And it's something that this isn't the first time and won't be the last time, and social media feeds it. But we ought to be really, really careful. And it's really easy to click share. And it's, oh, well, this is cool. Maybe it is true. So I click share. And that's how disinformation and bad theology and all kinds of negative stuff gets spread across the internet.
It's a breaking of the Ten Commandments. Like we are on, when we hit that share, we are bearing false witness in a much more public way than a lot of times people used to. I completely agree with that. I just wanted, like, I have seen a movement away from epistemic humility. Like we are so confident so fast that we know what happened because we have our theories about kind of how the world works, and there's a lot of differing, like literally contradictory theories, like within like the congregation of this awesome church. Like we're going to have some contradictory theories about how that works. We need to slow down. Your opinion about what happened does not matter so much. So you need to get on X or Twitter, or whatever we're calling it now, and like within a minute, like be saying something. Like, can we take 3 days? I like how David French did. Like, take 72 hours and let's just say this was horrible. We're glad he's okay, and let's just take 3 days from like the now let's make it a part of our political campaign thing. It's just gross.
Yeah, let the dust settle. Let the facts come to light. And when you fundamentally believe the system is corrupt, as many people do currently, I understand the skepticism, and I tend to be one of the worst skeptics you've ever met. But I'm also old enough to know that many of my initial responses to tragic events have been at best off, and at worst completely wrong. And so nothing's hurt by waiting. None of us are in charge. None of us are responsible. So maybe we ought to just settle down a little bit. So
one other quick thought, and then I'm going to transition us to the RNC, is going back to what you said about how many people are kind of like using these Messiah type conspiracy theories and things like that. Was just thinking about it. I understand that there are a lot of Christians who support Donald Trump because of policies that they agree with, and that's understandable. That does not mean that you have to support him as a person and think that he is like this Messiah person and connect him to Christianity. I don't think that we should be connecting him to Christianity. I think there are a whole bunch of young people that don't want to be part of Christianity because of how much we are connecting him. So let's not, you can agree with the policies without supporting like all of the things that the person does.
Right. And I think that's an important distinguishment, and I'm glad you brought it up, because again, the social media is built for extremes. It hands everybody a megaphone that they have access to 24/7. And and it's a relatively new in terms of human history tool. And we have not yet learned to use it responsibly. It's like a gun, folks.
Yes, it's like a machine gun.
You don't leave loaded guns on your front seat when you're driving in heavy traffic. It's just not a good idea. And you keep your guns under lock and key, and you pull them out only when you need them or when there's some specific use for them. And so, and Lord knows, and somebody will probably point this out, and as well you should, there have been many times in my past when I jumped on something on social media, and hopefully I'm growing.
We're all growing.
We're growing.
We're all on a journey.
I do try to temper myself. And then sometimes, because I'm sarcastic and I think I'm witty, I'm not, but I think I am. And so I'll put something up just flippantly and then regret it later. And so I'm certainly not casting too many stones because I live in a very big glass house on this.
It's going to be pretty rare that you end up regretting not saying the thing that you wanted to say.
That's such a great truth, man.
You are rarely going to regret not saying the thing. So maybe, like, I've recommended to people when we've done, like, I've done a bunch of podcasts on social media tips, and one of the tips that we've given people is write what you're going to post, do multiple proofreads before you post. So, like, you should proofread once just for tone. Just for tone. Like, is this the tone that you're wanting to go for? And then, also for accuracy and fact checking and grammar and like all of that stuff. But just like take a beat, and it is okay to write all that and then like keep it, save it on your desktop for a day, and then come back to it tomorrow and decide, do we want to do this? Okay. So this happened right before the Republican National Convention. Interestingly, Trump seemed to come out of this like immediately. His kind of first things he was saying was that he was ripping up his RNC speech, which is supposed to happen today. So this is, so we don't know what Trump's speech is actually going to be yet. But he claimed that he was ripping it up. and was rewriting one that's going to be all about unity. So that's going to be very interesting to see whether that actually happens. But we are now on, this is day 3, right, of the RNC? Day 4 today. Yep. So tell me about, what are some of the things that you've noticed about the first 3 days of the RNC?
So, and again, full disclosure, or a reminder at least, I am not a registered Republican, but I used to be.
Yeah,
I have never been a Democrat. I cannot envision that I will ever be a Democrat, but I come from a long line of people, particularly union folks, who were Democrats. So I see both sides, and that's why I think I can civilly dialogue with them, because I'm certainly wasn't going to hate my grandpa because he was a Democrat.
Yeah.
That all said, I am more interested in the Republican convention than I am, though I will watch both, because it's my right as an American, and I like to have something on in the background when I'm grading papers. So I watched it. I've not watched the whole thing. I generally I watch, and people get upset. I do not watch Fox News. I watch ABC or one of those.
Yes.
Because I kind of want somebody that's pushing my worldview in a direction maybe that's not, even though Fox does that pretty well anymore myself.
Yeah.
So I have gone from enraged and disgusted to apathetic at times across it, but I've never felt enthusiastic about what I've seen. Now, let me explain myself before I start getting on the hate mail. The first night I watched, they had a left-wing union official. And again, I'm not anti-union. I'm the first person in 4 or 5 generations of my family who was not a union member. My father and grandfather, members of the International Association of Railroad Engineers, locomotive engineers. I was fed and clothed because of unions.
Yeah. Regardless of people's thoughts about unions now, they were really, really important back then.
They were very important back then. Yeah. I mean, and if you don't believe it, read Upton Sinclair's The Jungle and some of his books from that time. But they're corrupt in the leadership, and perhaps the Teamsters is a little less corrupt. This was the Teamsters leader than some like AFL-CIO, but they're corrupt, and they generally are heavily left-wing, social liberal, anti-capitalist at times, not always, and so to have him up there as one of the big keynote speakers was a little shocking to me. Then you add the fact that prior to the evening, they stripped all of the language about traditional marriage out. Now, I understand...
From the party platform.
From the party platform. Yeah. And I understand it's a court decision decided by the Supreme Court. It's over with. But then they went in and basically gutted the majority of the pro-life language as well and said, okay, well, it's up to the states now. We're not taking a position. I'm very loosely paraphrasing it. Yeah. But really neutered it big time. Yeah. Okay. So, and then you had a prayer on that same evening offered by a woman who is a practicing Hindu who wore the Hindu garb, and her prayer began with calling upon an incarnation of a deity that is the one and only deity or whatever. And you know, as I look across the audience when this is going on, I see a bunch of evangelical Christians with their eyes closed and their heads bowed respectfully and so forth. And I got to tell you,
that's uncomfortable.
I'd rather them have no prayer at all, including evangelical prayers, than to have prayers to false gods and so forth. Yeah. So, and then they had a woman there by the name of Amber Rose. Amber Rose is one of the most despicable human beings on the planet.
Who is this person?
She is an influencer. She's a rapper. She invented something called the slut walk, which is very popular in African-American culture, but it's a seductive thing that celebrates women's sexual freedom and so forth. Okay. And she's absolutely pro-abortion from the top of her head to the bottom of her feet, but she's going to vote for Donald Trump. And so they featured here. And I think it's because of, you know, some of the political gain, some of the economic gains that blacks made and so forth. I'm not quite for sure because I was so enraged I didn't listen to what you had to say. Sure. So all of these, and this is prime time, okay? These were specifically chosen. Yeah. You know, Donald Trump shows up there, you know, ear bandage in place and so forth, and it's a big moment for the convention. And then he has to sit there and endorse these. Now, I understand politics. They're widening their tent. And so, but again, they tried this in the 90s and it didn't work, and they're going to try it again. Apparently, when you invite people who do not believe what you believe in the tent, you're going to have a war under the tent. And they're inviting that. And at some point, it would be my hope and my desire that evangelical Christians wake up and quit being the lapdogs of the GOP and start saying, you can't take our vote for granted, and spit on our core values.
Amen.
And so at some point, I was just thoroughly disgusted with that and irritated and so forth. So that kind of set me off on the first night. And I understand. I understand politics. I understand what they're doing. But this reminds me once again, Trump is not a conservative. Trump is a populist, and the Republican Party is now controlled and dominated by populists.
Yes, and a lot of people don't realize how
they don't even understand the difference.
Yeah, well, no, I was going to say they don't realize that Trump has basically cleaned house of the of the GOP.
His daughter-in-law, who also spoke, is the co-chair.
Yeah. So
which basically she's the public face. The other guy actually does the work, but she's and they're making a statement. Her last name is Trump, and it's my party now. Yeah.
And Christians being really excited about populism is a pretty rough look.
It ought to be, because generally speaking, who was it that said the public are fools? But the reality is the majority are rarely, never for biblical values, for biblical worldview, for those right things. It's why the freedom of speech and the freedom of religion are so integral to our hope in this country.
Yeah.
And I know freedom of speech goes two directions. I know all those things, but this was a statement, and I don't know that everybody truly understood the statement.
So I have a big question for you that I want to ask about that, because I hear what you're saying about this kind of tent widening thing, but then there's this other thing that's been going on that I'm looking at that feels like a contradictory message. So I want to get your thought on that, but we are out of time. And so are we going to do part 2?
We will do part 2. Excellent. I should have known up front that we would never get this done in one episode.
We figured it might happen.
Yeah. So we'll do a part 2 just for fun. And again, if you're the guy that does never, if you never want to hear your pastor talk about politics, then you probably shouldn't have listened this long. But you definitely want to skip the next episode.
Still not listening.
But please understand this. And part of the reason I have the political position I do now is I care about Christ's kingdom. I have no king but Christ. I have no kingdom but the kingdom of heaven that I care about. And so forth. That gives me, at least in my mind, in my heart, a comfortable objectivity to being able to do this. And yet I do view things through a biblical worldview, which tends to put me on the conservative end of the spectrum. And again, this is America. You can feel free to disagree with me. This is not theology. This is more philosophy. Yeah. And so if you disagree, let's have a cup of coffee, have a conversation. It'll be fun. You don't have to send me any ugly email. I won't send you one. We love each other, right? So as always, thank you so much for listening to us at Life Talks. These conversations are meant to poke you in the brain sometimes. And so you think and talk about it, pray about it, study your Bible, and let the Holy Spirit be your guide always. And until next time, thanks for listening to us here at Life Talks.